Hi everyone, welcome to week 6 of English 1302. I noticed on last week's video that during different parts I got to talking real fast, very hard to take notes, hard to even understand sometimes. So this week I'm going to be very intentional about speaking a little more slowly and a little more clearly. Two things to talk to you about. I've just posted the assignment sheet for the Research 2 project. Now, the first one was a single source paper, so you use the play as your only source. This one has two sources, so you're going to use the short story plus one other source. The short story is called Barn Burning by William Faulkner. I did provide a link there, although you can find it several other places. You can buy it online if you like. But it's a really wonderful but confusing short story. So, in order to start off this assignment, you're really going to want to sit down and read the story carefully. Take notes. Look at who's the protagonist, who's the antagonist. Pay special attention to the setting of the story and what's going on at the time and the place where the story is happening. There are some confusing bits. The main character, the protagonist, his name is Sarty, S-A-R-T-Y, which is short for Colonel Sartorius Snopes. Colonel Snopes was a big Civil War hero in Faulkner's world, fictional world. And so this main character is named after him in hopes that some of his importance or reputation will rub off on the little boy. Now, Sarty is only 11 years old, but he grows up. It's called a coming-of-age story because he grows up during the course of the story. And if you'll pay special attention to the last page, you'll kind of see how that happens. But anyway, so you're going to read the story Barn Burning very carefully, taking careful notes as you go through, and then you're going to pick one of the vocabulary words and use that vocabulary word to explain the story. You don't want to retell the story. Don't summarize the plot or just tell me what happened, but use one of the vocabulary words to explain it so that someone who's read it can understand it better. That's the whole point of having these vocabulary words. They become tools that help us understand literature better. So that's what I'm asking you to do, is help me understand the story better based on one of those vocabulary words. And you can choose pretty much any one you want to. I recommend that you use one of the main ones. It'll be a little bit easier, like the protagonist or the antagonist. Setting would be a good one to use. Theme, there is a good amount of irony in here. Character, like which characters are rounded, which characters are flat. It's also very helpful, and you'll notice this as you read the story. You will have to read it more than once, but Faulkner uses a lot of physical descriptions. The father of Sarty is very thin and wiry, and his son Sarty resembles him physically, but not morally. The son is Flem, is a larger boy who kind of resembles his mother, but again, emotionally is more like his father. Read the story and you'll understand a little bit better. Now, what you're going to turn in before Sunday, October 12th, you've got 2 weeks, is just an outline. And I will post up an example, but on the outline, all you need is a thesis and 3 topic sentences and 3 quotes. That's it. So 7 sentences here in the next 2 weeks, and you'll be good. All right, let's talk about the assigned readings for this week. You had one called The Shroud. Nice little short story. I've blown it up to make it easier to read, but actually it's only about a paragraph. It's less than half a page. It's called A Shroud by the Brothers Grimm. It's a fairy tale, and it's all about a little boy who's dead. And of course, you guys know what a shroud is. A shroud it's like a sheet that they use to cover dead people. Before they had body bags, before they had more formal things, they just covered them with a sheet, and sometimes that's what they got buried in. But the title implies death. So you got this little boy who doesn't have a name, but he is, quote, so handsome and so lovable that no one could look on him without liking him, and she herself, the mother, worshipped him above everything in the world. So the whole short story, he's only got two characters, the mother and her son. The son is dead. He's lying in his grave. And she is so sad, apparently. Now, I want you to read this carefully, make sure I'm not misunderstanding this. But apparently she's really sad because he's so handsome. Because he's dead and so handsome. And finally, the little boy comes back to life, and he tells her mother, you've got to stop crying, because every time you cry, it makes my shroud wet. Obviously, some metaphysical transformation there. And I cannot sleep. I cannot rest in peace. And so you got to stop crying. And so she does. That's literally the whole story there. The reason we study that story or bring it up is simply to show you that a story doesn't have to be long and detailed and convoluted and complex to have all the essential parts of a short story. You can tell a pretty tight little short story in just a few words. Now, to contrast that, to go the other way, we got a little short story called The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe, who gave us our definition of what a short story is. According to Edgar Allan Poe, a short story is, quote, any piece of literature that can be consumed in one sitting. You remember this from the PowerPoint on definitions. So Edgar Allan Poe tells this story about two men, Fortunato and Montresor. The name Fortunato literally means lucky, and Montresor is kind of a play on the words for Mr. So you got Mr. and you got Lucky. And these two guys are, they're mortal enemies, but they're also aristocrats and gentlemen. So they can't just attack each other and go after each other. And really, we don't know what happened to cause this flare-up in hostilities. The narrator, Montresor, says, 1,000 injuries of Fortunato had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. So when he hurt me a lot, but when he insulted my family's honor, that's when I had to get revenge. We study this story, and again, read it carefully, take notes as you go through it. But we study this story because it's a wonderful example of an unreliable narrator. If you'll pay attention to the end of the story, especially I think the last two sentences, we find out that the story is not told in present tense, even though it's using present tense verbs. He's telling this story 50 years after it happened. So 50 years ago, this happened. And you ask yourself, who would this guy be talking to 50 years after he killed this guy? Spoiler alert. Well, 50 years later, he's got to be nearing death, so he may be talking to a priest. This may be his confession. He could just be talking to himself. He may be hallucinating. We just really don't know, but he may not, in fact probably isn't, telling the exact truth about what happened. He's got this very complex and intricate scheme about revenge, and it just flows too smoothly, it goes too nicely, and it probably didn't happen exactly the way he did it. So he's a good example of an unreliable narrator. Also think about how Fortunato died. He changed him up in a small room and then bricks him up in there. He throws a torch in there, but he doesn't die from asphyxiation. And he kind of pokes through one of the bricks using his foil, using his sword, but he doesn't cause him to bleed out or something. So what else would cause a person who's confined in a very small room to die? Dehydration. But anyway, read the story. I think you'll like it. It's good. He writes in a very unique tone. He chooses words. Even when he wrote this 150 years ago, it was still very out of date. He was using words that were old-fashioned even when he was alive. So he's reaching way back in literary history to pull up words and phrases that would have made it sound very, very old-fashioned and very formal. Some of that you just have to wait. There's some you have to look up. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the two stories for this week and get a chance to get started on that second research paper. Oh yes, I was going to mention it. Going back to the second research paper, the story itself will be your first source. And then you look up a second source that will talk about whichever element you've chosen. If you're going to write about protagonists, then look for a source that talks about protagonists. Or if you're going to write about setting, then find a literary text that talks about setting. Now, there are lots of things to avoid. There's lots and lots of sources to avoid. If you'll find either a published book or a published journal article, a professional journal article, you'll be good as far as source evaluation. You'll want to avoid the bad ones and zero in on the good ones. I'll publish a PowerPoint and a whole separate video on that later. I hope you're having a good evening, and we'll talk some more tomorrow.